And also, I've got some insider tea on Act 3 and 4. Oh! Why would an artist who's so obsessed with the number 4, a numerologist honestly at this point, only have 3 acts? So I fear this album has far too many layers and is far too brilliant of an academic dissertation and just a collection of bops that the girls are not going to gather all of the gems that they need or that they could have if they didn't watch this review. I've got to be honest with you, and that means that I do the investigative work. Girl, grab your Bible and your whiskey, because we getting into it. You can leave the Bible, just bring the whiskey. Howdy, cowgirl, cowboy, and cowies. I didn't think that through. Hey, homegirl, homeboy, and homies, welcome and welcome back to my corner of the internet, a corner where pop culture meets critical thought and medium ghetto antics. Now listen, Beyonce, girl, you have done it again. The level of care, study, and intention in this album is unrivaled by any of your contemporaries, but you already knew that. So unless you've been living under a rock, you are aware that Beyonce just dropped the second act in her unnamed 3-act project. Yes, that is correct. That was a reminder that this 3-act project is still unnamed. But hold your horses, Renee and Chardonnay, because very recently I did come in contact with some insider tea from a source close to Beyonce. Girl, gag! Girl, gag. Now, we know Beyonce is one of the most secretive people on the planet, so, girl, take this all with a grain of salt and know that this is all alleged. However, I can say that this source is reliable. I won't disclose too much because I'm not going to give their tea. But I can say that this source is reliable and that they got their information from within the label. I'm not going to talk about that. We're going to get into that a little bit later. But if you are interested in hearing that tea, comment a teacup emoji. I don't see you. Girl, I'm too excited. We are about to get into some things today. But I think it's important for me to lay the foundation of this video. This is going to be nothing short of a sociological and musical analysis of Beyonce's most recent country-ish album, or as she puts it, a body of work where she bent and blended genres. So it really is a genreless album with country roots, which is interesting because it lends itself to the kind of artist Beyonce is in general, right? Like, she is a genreless artist with roots in the country. And my goal here today is for us all to walk away from this album and Beyonce the artist and maybe music in general, engaging with this art from a deeper, more intentional and new space. Cowboy Carter is an ambitious musical concoction meant to challenge what is possible with respect to marrying opposing sounds and genres. But also, it's important to remember that the impetus of this project is a traumatizing experience Beyonce had with racial discrimination. She said in an IG post, "This album has been over 5 years in the making. It was born out of an experience I had years ago where I didn't feel welcome, and it was clear that I wasn't. But because of that experience, I did a deeper dive into the history of country music and studied our rich musical archive." So yes, it's important to say that this is a great artistic project, but also it's a labor of love, right? It required rigorous study, particularly because Beyonce is so in tune with the power of music to propel culture forward, right? You can tell that she believes that on a spiritual level because she so often creates work that honors that responsibility. And so it's for those 2 reasons that I'll be approaching this project in 2 ways. I know we hate a binary, but listen, it is a YouTube video at the end of the day. We're going to be approaching this deep dive from an artistic space because it's just a magical piece of work, right? But then we're also going to be tackling it in the second chapter of this video from a sociological place because it is a mind Respectfully, mother did her research. So first up, let's talk about the artistic impression that this is having right now on music, right? And the legacy that it's going to leave on the culture. Chapter 1, Cowboy Carter, an artistic endeavor. I think it's easiest to start with the artistic piece because this is the part that comes most natural to us, right? It's about feeling. Here is where you decide whether or not this sound is something that you enjoy or something that you are partial to, right? What impact, if any, does this particular art have on you? For me, Act 2 is a sonic masterpiece, and I don't say that lightly, right? I do consider myself to be an informed critic. Not necessarily harsh, but an informed critic, and this is a sonic masterpiece, baby. But it also is the instrumental antithesis to Act 1. Whereas Act 1 was a lot of engineered sounds and what felt like virtual instrumentation, Cowboy Carter takes a much less robotic and a more human approach. And in that way, I see the connection between these two acts as cyborgian, and I think that that's intentional. Beyonce said in an interview, "The more I see the world evolving, the more I feel a deeper connection to purity. With artificial intelligence and digital filters and programming, I wanted to go back to real instruments, and I used very old ones. I didn't want some layers of instruments like strings, especially guitars and organs, perfectly in tune. I kept some songs raw and leaned into folk. All the sounds were so organic and so human. Everyday things like wind, snaps, and even the sounds of birds and chickens. The sounds of nature." And what she doesn't say here, which I think must be highlighted at the top of this video, is that Beyonce's voice is the most foreground instrument on this project. As she bends genres and effortlessly weaves through seemingly opposing sounds, Cowboy Carter is a performance of Beyonce's vocal prowess. We open this album with simple strings and a consistent piano key that works in tandem with Beyonce's vocal harmonies to create almost a hypnotizing effect. And the vibrato. This album opener is alluring, and I think she intended it to be so that she could deliver this very important message and the sociological message for this project. But again, we'll get more into that in the second chapter of this video. But from a musical production perspective, this is so simple in the grand scheme of what Beyonce can do vocally, right? It's a merging of everything that this album is about to be. It's raw, it's organic instrumentation, it is intentional vocality, vocal arrangement. And as this album continues, we get Beyonce's renditions of country classics like Jolene, 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 Jolene. I'm warning you, bitch. And we also get, a country classic, Blackbird. And of course, I love what Beyonce did with both of them, but particularly Blackbird. When we get these classics, it's a reminder that yes, this album has country roots, but the genre that it flirts with most is folk and rock. Soft rock, alternative rock, because really, Blackbird was on a rock album. It's like a soft rock, folk, country baby. But, white men are allowed to play with all those genres and it can be called whatever they choose to call it. Now, let's talk about Jolene. I think some people are going to try to grab me by my lace when they see me about this take. So a couple of days ago, about 5 days ago now at this point, I asked you guys which version or rendition of Jolene were you partial to? Beyonce's or Dolly's? And Dolly's won by a landslide. I believe at the current time of filming, it's got about 3,000 votes and Dolly is about 60% or over 60%, right? So she won by a landslide. And here's the thing, you can be a fan of both. I am a fan of both. I really appreciate Beyonce's lyrical content, right? And those lyrical changes, I appreciate them. And I'll also say that I prefer Beyonce's tone to any tone on the planet. I love her instrument. Understand that. But there's something to be said about Dolly's ability on this song in particular to portray a kind of desperation and hurt that I just am drawn to. For this song, it's human, it's real. Folks, maybe you haven't been there. You the baddest bitch walking. Shout out to you, sis. I'm trying to get like you. I'm trying to get like you, bruh. But, many folks have been in different places in their life where maybe that's just not where their emotion is. And so this song has always had a particular emotion that I have an affinity for. And her vocals were so light, which makes her vibrato sound even more like sensitive and weary to me. I'll also say I really enjoyed Miley's rendition of this because Miley has that country twang and that rasp that I enjoy. You guys know I stan Mother Miley. Beyonce's voice is like water. And on this song, she isn't trying to beg or plead. This is a warning, baby. I'm letting you know right now, all I'm doing is seeing red. So you might want to pack your bags and dip. And so the clarity that her voice brings to this song is really cool. It just doesn't outdo the original rendition for me. Let's talk beyond the classics. On this project, we get original works of storytelling that I really enjoy. We get Bodyguard, Protector, and Daughter. And can we pause? Can we pause for a moment on Bodyguard and Daughter? Now, don't get me wrong. I love Protector. Protector actually gets me pretty emotional, and I got into a little bit the reasons why Protector gets me emotional on my Patreon in our listening party that we did last week for Cowboy Carter. So I'm gonna graze past that and I'm gonna talk about Bodyguard. In my opinion, Bodyguard is very Fleetwood Mac coded, which is so fun for me because I've seen a lot of people online saying that it's like a departure from country and it feels like Beyonce is giving us R&B, and it's like, ooh, slow your roll, baby. Slow your roll, because your diet racism is showing. What you're hearing, or maybe ignorance, and ignorance is not a pejorative. Ignorance is saying that maybe you don't know. What you're hearing is soft rock. That's what you're hearing, babe. You're hearing soft rock. So many people are asking for a rock album or are anticipating that Act 3 is going to be a rock album. And I'm looking to the left and I'm looking to my right. And I'm like, Beyonce has infused so much rock and roll in this album. I'm not sure if we're going to get a dedicated rock and roll project. We didn't get a dedicated country project, right? This album, like I said, is a genreless project with roots in country music, and country music pours over into blues and into folk and into rock, right? So I'm not sure, but more on this later. Bodyguard feels so good. I've got to be honest with you. It's a love anthem, unlike many of her other love anthems, because it has that delicate balance of the masculine and the feminine energy. Of course, she's asserting herself as a protector, a bodyguard, which is a traditionally masculine role. I'm not sure we've gotten a Beyonce like this in her masculine-ish bag, which we love balance, since maybe like Sugar Mama. No, it's got to be something past Sugar Mama. Y'all comment Beyonce's most masculine songs. I need to know where our minds are. But justice for Sugar Mama while we at it. Justice for Sugar Mama. Sugar Mama, Sugar Mama. Now, I do just want to add here that there is an Easter egg in this song where she goes, I whisper secrets in the backbeat. That, I'm not sure if we're going to get into it today. I may have to save it for Act 3 because I feel like I know things that you don't know. Let me stop being dramatic. But I do feel like it may be better explained once the visual comes on, or once the visual comes out. But I don't know. Maybe I'll get into it. You know, the spirit may follow me and I'll just talk about it. But on to Daughter. Daughter has a similar balancing act. And also, let's take a moment for ominous Beyonce. Beyonce, when she's in her Haunting You era, Daughter has already been placed in the same playlist as Haunted, Echoes, Superpower. I just love Beyonce in her dark, seductive era. And this song has a darkness and a seduction to it that's very feminine. But it also has a kind of aggression where she's like threatening violence of unaliving someone, or actually portraying how she unalives someone in a very masculine way. The girls have been knowing that Beyonce has had an affinity for opera for a while. Ave Maria on IASF, the background vocals, operatic vocals on Flawless, also Black is King. She just keeps showing us, girl, I can do you an aria. Now, I can do you an aria, girl. I can give you an operatic moment if it is what you really want. I can give you that thing. But that insertion of this particular opera song, girl, I'm not an opera girl, so I can't give you all of the things. But what I will say is that song and, the translated meaning, my heart hurts when you're not around, when you're not here. Adding that operatic moment adds another level to the picture that this song is painting, right? It adds new colors and new depth, because it's like, girl, I would not have expected you to do that in the middle of this moment like that. Girl, what does this album not give us is a shorter list than what this album gave us, right? In terms of the musical piece of this conversation, right? Such an artful and unpredictable decision. I just loved it. But it really just goes to show that this album is an exercise of expanding genre. And the interludes in this album really underscore that. The Smoke Hours breaks. And I love it, Smoke Hours, because it's almost like a little smoke break where Willie Nelson comes on and does his little moment, does his little one too. I also love how when he first comes on, he goes, you know who I am. You already know who I am, because it's talking to a specific audience, the country listeners that Beyonce is trying to target. Of course, you know who Willie Nelson is. Further adding a level of legitimacy to Beyonce creating this country infused or country rooted album by bringing on these, country icons. And I also love that he gives us this like warm feeling of like, we're on this old country radio station. And when we first hear him, it's almost like we are going through different radio stations where we're hearing pioneers in various different Black music genres, all with a country-ish rock sound. And so I just really appreciated that. I also appreciated Linda Martell reminding us that genres are like all rules. They are made to be broken. And then there are songs on this album that are equally beautiful, as they are intended to build the story that Beyonce is trying to portray, right? So there's American Requiem, Blackbird, 16 Carriages, Bodyguard, Jolene, Spaghetti, and pause on spaghetti, because that is a reference to spaghetti westerns, which were typically filmed in Europe by Italian directors, hence the spaghetti term. And they were typically more cynical and violent than their Hollywood counterpart because they weren't bound by the Hays Code. We've talked about the Hays Code before, but I was a much smaller channel at the time. Essentially, that stopped certain things from coming on TV. Violence, different forms of sexual activity. So it was just very like, girl, very PC in the worst way. But honestly, that makes sense when you consider the aggression with which Beyonce approaches this song. It's like, oh, of course, this is an homage or a nod to spaghetti westerns. So cool, so interesting. I found that funny. Anyway, Ya Ya and Amen are also the story builder songs. They are one half of a filmatic whole. And I want to say that because that means that the visuals will complete this story. And it also means that Cowboy Carter is a character. You get what I'm saying? Renaissance is a theme, right? It's the next part of the plot. Cowboy Carter is a character. So as she engages Jolene, as she engages her friend Miley and Two Most Wanted, we're gonna get to Two Most Wanted. But as she is going through all of this and also laying that sociological foundation, which is the context for this story, you can't be saying, oh my God, Beyonce's still talking about Jay-Z and how I could see why you would want my man. It's not really about Jay-Z. It's about Cowboy Carter's significant other. Cowboy Carter is not Beyonce. Beyonce is playing the role vocally, because we do not have the visual piece yet. All we have is the audio of Cowboy Carter. Also, like, please, not too much. Jay-Z is fine. It's not up for debate. It's not up for debate. Back to the point that I'm trying to discuss here. But in these songs lives history and a premeditated narrative is the point that I'm making, right? And they stand on their own even without the visual. And then there are songs on this album that are kind of like detours, like Two Most Wanted, Levi's Jeans, Desert Eagle. Woo! I love that. Two Hands to Heaven, Tyrant, Sweet Honey, Bookin'. They don't necessarily play into the sociological message that I've derived from this album, but maybe you see things differently, you know? Listen to me when I say this is a body of work. And that level of skill is admirable, right? Because we know that it requires rigorous study and attention to detail, the kind of study and attention to detail that I referenced earlier. And if it was never clear to you that Beyonce is a student of musicology and history, this project makes it clear to you. But see, you have to also be a student to catch it. I think that is the next way that I engage with this project, and I want to challenge you to do so as well. As a student. Chapter 2, Cowboy Carter, an Academic Endeavor. You know, I've said numerous times that this unnamed 3-act project feels like a doctoral dissertation being released in parts, right? And much like that level of research and that academic piece of literature, you'll never really understand the findings or the intention of that work without having the whole piece. But, you know, let's go with what we have so far, right? The children can speculate, can't they? We can. And what we have currently are the lyrics. We have bits of the visuals. We have hints dropped in the backbeat, whispering the connection between these two acts. What we have are the echoes. And don't you worry, we are 100% gonna get into Echoville. How could we not? I know that I am, and many of you are as well, of the belief that these hidden meanings will reveal themselves when we get this visual project, a visual project that will encompass potentially all 3 acts. That will potentially, allegedly be called Echoville. More on that to come. You know, it's clear to me that Renaissance, sorry, I cannot say Renaissance without doing, you know, the thing. But it's clear to me that Renaissance was about releasing traditional expectations around gender performance and sexual proclivity, particularly but not exclusively within the Black context. It was about resilience, embrace, sexual liberation, and the strength of an unbreakable soul. Are y'all ready? Beyonce maintains in Cowboy Carter her mission for liberation in her image. But this time, instead of dissecting gender performance and sexual presentation and orientation, she's subtly revealing her perspective or her position on racial liberation. I am of the belief that that is a raceless one. Now listen, y'all gonna have to follow me on this one and follow me closely because the idea or the theory of racelessness is a complex one. And if you aren't familiar with the theory of racelessness, we're gonna get into that in just a moment. But everything that Beyonce, aka Cowboy Carter, is doing is showing me that she is a racial reconstructionist, which is a subcategory of racelessness or the theory of racelessness. Everything from her recent quotes, some of her past work, and this patriarchal imagery, it suggests to me that she has a desire for a world not confined by racial boundaries and preconceived notions on the basis of race. But as a Black person, you can't just say that. You have to apply the nuance, because if you don't, it'll come out sounding like this.
I'm tired of being labeled. I'm an American. I'm not an African American. I'm an American.
Oh, girl, don't set up the Twitter on fire. Oh,
I'm sorry.
What?
I'm sorry.
My Lord. What did you just...
And was Oprah correct? Girl, they drug the Queen of Disney into oblivion. But what Beyonce says that I feel like is my first piece, and we're going to go deeper. I feel honored to be the first Black woman with the #1 single on the Hot Country Songs chart. My hope is that years from now, the mention of an artist's race as it relates to releasing music will be irrelevant. Now, Beyonce has been the first Black woman to do countless things that she has not publicly acknowledged. So I wonder, what is the intention behind mentioning this racial barrier breaking moment and then following that up with her hopes for a raceless society, or a society where racelessness is possible and it doesn't have to consider race in conversations of her respective work, music, but I think there's more to it. Because of course, if Blackness is so important, as I believe it to be, and integral to her creative process, as I believe it to be, why go for this aesthetic? Section 2A. Yes, girl, 2A. From Black is King to an American Patriot. Why this imagery? Now, I've already explained the significance of the title Cowboy Carter in a previous video that I'll link in the description box below. I am not going to do it again. But what I will say is, the title pays homage to Leslie Riddle, a pioneer in country music. And it is also an attempt to reclaim a previously derogatory term, cowboy, which was lobbed at Black folk who worked with cattle, as opposed to calling them cowmen or cowhand. That was exclusive to white folk. But what is worth spending an exuberant amount of time on is this artwork, especially as a girl who has the original intentioned artwork with the Black hair, particularly like the beads in the front of this hair is very Africana. This feels like a very much so an infusion of the African in the American, right? But what she decided to go for is American patriot down boots caboodles.
I'm not an African American. I'm an American.
This artwork for me is so thought-provoking and so provocative, which isn't really a shock because we know Beyonce has mastered the art of coupling visuals that are powerful and sometimes provocative with her work. It's a really fundamental part of her career and her creative output, hence our years-long cry for, girl, the visuals. We the Hive are tired of being the visuals, baby. I'm tired of being the visuals. I'm tired of being the visuals. I'm tired. Now, I start here, by establishing her proficiency in image making, because there's no world in which this is not political. There's no world in which this is not intentional. She's the same singer of Black Parade. She is a Black woman in a red, white, and blue rodeo queen outfit, holding an American flag with a bleach blonde wig. Come on. But I do believe that there are two ways to see this. There's innumerable ways to see this, but for the sake of this video, we're going to use the binary. First, how I think most people may have responded to this, right? I think this may be the take where it's like, yup, that's it. That's exactly what she's doing. Now, I'm going to give this take its moment, but there is another take. Beyonce recognizes the marketability and relatability of this image, right? Particularly to the target demographic, which is country music listeners, which is overwhelmingly white folk. And holding an American flag while wearing very light blonde hair, even for Beyonce, as a light-skinned Black woman, plays into this Americana aesthetic that is central to country music, right? And then it can also create this idea of sameness, or maybe visual adjacency for the white liberals and the good white folks who don't consider themselves racist. The folks who genuinely felt offended by the cruel racism that Beyonce experienced at the CMAs, which, after all, was the catalyst for this album. And, the girls will argue that Beyonce, being the hyper-capitalist queen that she is, she's going to give you an image that she knows is going to sell down boots, caboodles, right? And it works. Beyonce now has is the only Black female artist, and I think maybe the only female artist that has an 8 #1 albums consecutively. I believe that to be true. Fact check me and put it in the comments. But if Bell Hooks were here, which you know Bell Hooks is on my Mount Rushmore of media figures, she would drag Beyonce and the alleged white liberals that she's allegedly pandering to, every single one of them by their lace. There is a quote that I want to use from Bell Hooks from a chapter entitled Loving Blackness as Political Resistance in Black Looks, where she says, liberals pride themselves on their ability to tolerate others, but only after the other has been redescribed as oneself, that the liberal is able to be sensitive to the question of cruelty and humiliation. This act of redescription is still an attempt to appropriate others, only here it's made to sound as if it were a generous act. It is an attempt to make an act of consumption appear to be an act of acknowledgement. And what we see here is Beyonce potentially visually redescribing herself for the country audience. Maybe that's a critical lens that I think holds value. I think that perspective absolutely holds value, but I think that there is another way to view this that can rival that one, right? Because we know that Beyonce is often criticized for performative activism, or what people view to be performative activism that's solely about attaining more capital. And I think that this image, again, offers us an opportunity to look at this from a different vantage point and to potentially understand what her liberation ethic might be. And I believe, like I alluded to earlier, that it might align itself with the theory of racistness. Initially, what comes to mind is this poem that Beyonce said in her critically acclaimed Lemonade.
If it's what you truly want, I can wear her skin over mine, her hair over mine.
And now, if we remove the original context, which is infidelity on the part of Jay-Z with white woman Becky, Beyonce is essentially saying, figuratively speaking, that she can put on the aesthetic of this white woman. Don't worry, baby, I got you. And while blonde hair isn't exclusive to white folk, we know that it is the highest standard of beauty and whiteness that these folks use. But we do have to knock on reality, right? The way race works in this country and has always worked in this country, Beyonce will continue to be perceived as Black. You know, you can't escape Blackness with a 613 middle part bust down. It's just not going to happen. But what this image may be doing, what it may be serving to say is, I can wear your hair over mine, your symbols over mine, because I too am American. And whereas with Black is King, Beyonce was painting Black folk as regal, rich, regent.
And my hope for this film is that it shifts the global perception of the word Black, which has always meant inspiration and love and strength and beauty to me. But Black is King means Black is regal.
She's doing something different with Cowboy Carter, because I think it's there's a place to say Black girls don't have to have Black girl magic or be magical or show up with sparkles in order to be worthy, right? She can just be an African American. She can just be regular. Although there isn't much regular about a 40-inch middle part bust down, but you get what I'm saying. The Americana imagery creates a kind of like, I'm one of you situation. Because here we do see a Black woman showing up in the most Americana aesthetic possible. And her vision for America remains the same, right? Liberty and justice for all. But for things to stay the same, they have to change again. Sound familiar? We need another uprising. We need another revolution in order to experience the rebirth of a renaissance. We need the death of the America we know to get to the America that she sees. An American Requiem is required to attain a racist America that does not question the way that Black people show up. Now, I guess it's time for me to explain the theory of racistness that I introduced earlier so that we can all be fully on the same page, and really why I think that this is a part of Beyonce's racial liberation ethic. This is pretty complex stuff, so I'm going to give you an operational definition that I feel is more tailored to this video, and then we'll move from there. So racelessness really rejects the idea that race is real in the sense that it is a biological reality or a social construction that's always existed, that's created these kind of inevitable, irrevocable, immovable distinctions between racial lines. It's biological, right? We can't help it. I can't help that white people just can't season their food. Girl, let me tell you something. I've met some white folks that will season their food till you sneeze. I have. racelessness. But really, this theory is to say that maybe what we identify as race is really culture, ethnicity, or, regional differences. But what it does understand as real is racism. And racism is a byproduct of this man-made construction of race that thrives because we continue to practice racializing each other. The consequences of that racialization, where I'm like, oh, you're definitely black, you're definitely white, you're definitely brown. The consequences of that racialization are these stereotypes and these generalizations of what folks within that racial group can and cannot be and do. And if you're still confused, I will link a video about racistness all by itself in the description box down below by a friend of mine, Khadijah Mabo. Now, earlier in the video, I mentioned that Beyonce said in an Instagram caption that she has a dream for the future where artists can release music irrespective of race and the race wouldn't necessarily be relevant. Yeah, that was a musician speaking within the confines of their work. But later, she showed up to the iHeartRadio Awards to accept an Innovator Award and looked stunning while doing so. And it was important and strategic that she did or showed up to that particular award show because iHeartRadio features over 3,000 stations, many of which are in Middle America, speaking directly to the folks that she wants to speak to, right? Listening to these, alleged segregated stations. And she came there to push her raceless message.
My hope is that we're more open to the joy and liberation that comes from enjoying art with no preconceived notions. I want to dedicate this award to all the innovators who have dedicated their lives and their art to creating shifts. Thank you to Rosetta Tharpe, Miss Tracy Chapman, Linda Martell, Prince, Stevie Wonder, Andre 3000, Tina Turner, Michael Jackson, and so many more who defied any label placed upon them. Thank you for executing your dream so we could all follow.
Now, initially these can feel unspecific, but when you get to the portion where she's giving her honors, she's only recognizing black pioneers. And here again is where I understand what she's doing. Folks who subscribe to the theory of racistness can be broken down into several categories, 3 to be specific, but the one that Beyonce falls into is a reconstructionist in my mind, which means, yes, she identifies as black, but it also means that she understands that race is a social construction that, as I said earlier, aids in the generalization and the limiting beliefs associated with folks within a given race. And as a reconstructionist, she is interested in adjusting or reconstructing the way folks see black people, the way folks engage blackness, and what folks think is possible for blackness, with the end goal of arriving in a world past race, post race, that exists after race. Do you get what I'm saying? Now, please understand that this was not all just informed by a blonde wig and black skin, right? The songs in this project, I believe, support my theory. The album starts with American Requiem, which of course is a mass for the dead, implying really the death of America. But requiems are specific. They're not just any typical funeral. They are funerals in which the Eucharist is present, in which the body and the blood of Christ or God is present. So therefore, life is also present. This song is equally about life and death, the birth and destruction of the same thing, America. And it's no coincidence that she released this album on Good Friday, the same day that many folks view that Jesus or God died and would eventually come back to life. America was founded on 2 things, Jesus and whiskey. Yeah. No, but seriously. As I said earlier, this song is about the destruction of the old America and the creation of a new un-American life. Sound familiar? We know that Renaissance was initially going to be Act 2, but obviously because of the pandemic, Beyonce says that the world deserved to dance, right? So she put out a dance album first. But if you look at it from the way that she initially intended for these 2 things to come out, and you remember that I'm That Girl is the opening track, the same way that, American Requiem is the opening track for this act, you remember that they echo a similar spiritual sentiment. I'm That Girl ends with, cleanse me of my sins. And also, we close the Renaissance chapter with this quote.
But the Renaissance is not over.
And this album opens with, I think that's referencing 2 things. 1, the connective tissue between these 2 projects. And the connection in my mind is really about Beyonce's ideas for liberation on different social constructs. Gender for Renaissance, race for Cowboy Carter. And because, in my mind, this album is about race, Nothing Really Ends is also a reference to America's original sin, racism. Racism really hasn't ended. Hello. And then she goes, for things to stay the same, they have to change again. And I think the sameness that she's referring to is what America has always espoused that it stood on: liberty and justice for all. But also, there's this theme of wind that is actually spoken. She says wind a lot throughout this album. Also, that is like an instrument in this project. I told you earlier at the top of this video that she uses wind she said that she uses wind as an instrument on this project. And the girls that know Beyonce know that she's no stranger to infusing African spirituality in her work, particularly in her work that is meant to be racially challenging. If you know, you know. Not J-Lo.
If you know, you know.
But there's an African goddess, Oya, who is the Orisha of both death and the creator of life, which works within this Requiem theme because this is about the death and rebirth of America. But she's also the Orisha of, storms and wind is representative of change. When she says, now is the time to face the wind, that is her directly saying, now is the time to embrace the change. Now is the time to face the change. And this song ends a similar way that Renaissance ends by saying, I am the one who cleansed me of my father's sins, American Requiem, which is yet again, I believe, a reference to the original sin committed by the forefathers of America. But also, are we not seeing the connection between Renaissance's I'm That Girl and Cowboy Carter's American Requiem at this point? Are we not seeing it? She's saying essentially that her work, her revolt, has led to her renaissance and her rebirth. And also, these songs are intended, yes, for Black folks firstly, but also for allies and non-Black folk to echo the words, I am the one who cleansed me of my father's sins. I'm living my un-American life. I can eradicate the structures created by my forefathers. Now, no shade, but what Beyonce won't tackle is class. If you're looking for her to tackle class in Act 3, it's a chop. She then goes on into a song originally written by Paul McCartney that has always been about racial liberation, the civil rights movement, and a hope for change.
Blackbird, I was sitting around with my acoustic guitar and I'd heard about the civil rights troubles that were happening in the 60s in Alabama, Mississippi, Little Rock in particular. So that was in my mind, and I just thought it'd be really good if I could write something that, if it ever reached any of the people going through those problems, it might kind of give them a little bit of hope. England, a bird is a girl. So I was thinking of a Black girl going through this, now's your time to arise, set yourself free.
And to place this right after that is obviously very intentional, and I appreciate that. I also really appreciate her putting on these 4 Black women so that it's like, here are these women leading the charge for this progressive change, right? And this civil uprising. I love the message, but here's where I do have to critique Beyonce, because it's like the Black artists, and in particular the Black women on this project, were underutilized. And that's unfortunate. I love the attention and the exposure and the increased streaming that every Black artist is getting. I think I saw somewhere that girl Linda Martell saw over 100,000% increase in her Spotify streams, girl. I love what I know is the Beyonce effect, which is you will see a boost in all the things. But how long is that gonna last? And also, was this the most effective way to do it? Was this the most transgressive way to do this, right? Because, Beyonce is a protected and exceptional artist in that no matter what she drops, people are going to show up. Folks like us are going to show up every single time. I think that it would have been more advantageous and more transgressive for her to amplify these Black women and Black men's voices by giving them more of a vocal moment, right? Why are the largest vocal moments with white folk, Miley and Post Malone? Now, I'm gonna say this. I had an eargasm and jumped out of my skin when I saw that Beyonce and Miley Cyrus are on the same track. If you know me, you know. If you know, you know.
If you know, you know.
Miley Cyrus, aka Hannah Montana, was my Beyonce before I was fan of Beyonce the way that I am now. And to this day, I still love Miley. Bangers, one of the best pop albums of all time. So I loved this. This was created specifically for me. However, my initial critique still stands. And Levi Jeans is just so sweet on the ear. It is also an eargasm. I enjoy it immensely. But it didn't have to be Post Malone. There are many Black women and men who would have ate both those songs up. But what I will say is it may circle itself back to this idea of racelessness, because both Miley and Post Malone are white folks who have been able to find success place in contemporarily understood Black spaces, hip hop, that particular space. And they used the aesthetics and adjacency to Blackness in order to find that success. Now, sure, both these songs are great, but I'll say that I think Beyonce may be using their racial currency to enter these songs in spaces that maybe a Black bird will not be played, in radio stations that maybe a Black bird will not be played. I saw a video where I saw, older white folks getting out or leaving a room where Tanner Adele started to sing Blackbird. And so maybe these songs will enter those spaces and bring them back to this album that's really about racelessness, racial liberation in essence. If they pick up those messages, right? If they see the things for what it is. And yes, this strategy is to get more money in her pocket, but it is also about getting more ears to this project. In the same way that Miley and Post Malone have been able to make art and utilize adjacency to Blackness to target the audience they want to speak to, which are Black ears and Black listeners, Beyonce may be doing the same thing to target folks on these radio stations where they may or may not listen to other bodies of work, right? Or other songs on this body of work. Girl, I say this all to say, maybe this is all part of our master plan. Now, child, let's wrap this up. I've been talking far too long. I'm going to give you guys my updated thoughts on the visuals, aka Where's Echoville, and then my top 5. It all infused with the tea I got from a source close to Beyonce's team. Allegedly. Where are the visuals? So it's been speculated by all of us at this point that Beyonce is eventually going to drop some visuals for this 3-act project, right? This unnamed 3-act project, and that may be called Echoville. We're nosy. We've seen Echoville in the tour visuals. She references it in her collab with Travis Scott on his album Echoes. It's the echoes that I wait for. But also because we're nosy, we know that she's trademarked in 8 different spaces Echoville. So we're like, girl, what you finna do with that? I've been scratching my head for a while about these visuals. Why would Beyonce, a person, and beyond the visuals, why would Beyonce, a person obsessed with the number 4, drop a 3-act project? And a lot of people are assuming that this is her retirement project, or just she won't drop anything for a very long time after this. Well, according to my source, it will absolutely be a 4-act project. Also, according to my source, there is no speculation. Beyonce is for sure going on tour this year, which is interesting because last year she dropped her album, waited some months for us to get into the music, and then announced that she was going on tour the next year. To do an album and a tour in the same year, she's crazy. I can't stand her. I will be buying tickets. But also, according to this source who was speaking to someone who is, pretty intoxicated and spilling the tea, the last album is actually going to be an R&B album, kind of rounding off her career roots, right? We met her with R&B, and we went on this long journey with her. We're gonna round it out with R&B. Now, they said this with a bit of hesitation because they said that Beyonce keeps changing her mind on whether or not she wants to do that as the final album. But I think that this theory makes so much sense because she's already given us this mixed genre album. She's given us this dance eclectic album. We got what I believe to be an alternative album with Lemonade. We got so many different types of things from Beyonce over the years. And also it makes sense that because she added, right, Spaghetti, Yaya, Flamenco, these songs that don't necessarily have, that disrupt that country feel to the album later. It feels like maybe she's just like, okay, girl, let me add all of this because the girls are saying rock. And also I'd love to do rock. Let's throw these songs in that's why it's so long. We went from 16 songs in the previous album to 27 on this album to say, okay, girl, let me give you this rock and roll feel. Let me give you this rock and roll feel. And also this makes sense because I've already thought for a while that the 3rd act was going to be the visuals. These 2 projects just work so synergistically that it just makes sense to drop a visual project as the 3rd act. Have the girls think it's all over. Round it up with an R&B album that features all of Destiny's Children, with the exception of Luggage. We have not referenced Luggage in decades. But those are my thoughts. And also because the visuals have been filmed. The girls have been seeing all across the internet that Beyonce filmed these by comparing, cross-analyzing things from the tour, Cowboy Carter visuals, Ivy Park launches, the teasers from I'm That Girl. The girls are like, girl, even the Verizon commercial, you got them visuals filmed. We know it. I think the 3 acts are going to be these 2 projects and then the visual, and then the R&B album is going to round up and wrap up her career. It's a retirement plan that is beautifully done. Now, again, all that information is alleged. Mwah. Let me give you my top 5, and then I've got to go, and I want to hear you sound off in the comments all of your thoughts on all of the things that I said because I'm an insane person. Also, I'll be giving you my thoughts on why Echoville is called Echoville because it is an incredibly brilliant title. In a separate video, I just cannot do it today. My top 5 are in no particular order. 1, American Requiem. Again, no particular order. American Requiem, the academic in me just adores it, right? It's perfection, all the layers and the meaning and the harmonies. Mwah. Love it. 2 Most Wanted. If a collab was ever made specifically for Herbie, Lil Herb and Big Herb alike, this is it. I love it so much. Yes, I critiqued it, but we critique what we love. Yeah, that girl. That girl, okay? I told y'all I am a fan of Tina Turner, and Yaya makes me feel like an Ike. I get my whole life. Levi's jeans, so sexy, so sensual, so smooth. Someone take me on a picnic date and play Levi's jeans. Thank you. Mwah. Now, 2 Hands to Heaven, perfect. Love it. So good. Has a splash of R&B feel at the end. I want the runs to continue. And when you go on tour, amplify that hoe. And finally, as a special mention or an honorable mention, I was like, what is that term? An honorable mention, I'll say Desert Eagle. Anyway, I gotta go. I love you too bad. But before I let you go, you know I will never leave you without saying this. I am in a constant state of practice, and so are you. You can never fail when you're in a constant state of practice. I love you. Bye, homegirl.